Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and welcome to our brand new What If series on the channel. What if Kashimo was reborn in the modern era? And I don't mean like born, like incarnated like he was in the modern era, I mean reborn as a student. And some of you guys might be wondering, how is this even going to be possible? Well, I'm going to talk about that here. However, if you don't care about the possibilities and you want to get straight into the story, time code is down below, you can click and go ahead. So anyways, let me get into how this is going to work. Now, as we know, reincarnation is an actual thing in JJK, with the only person who was actually reincarnated being Jin Itadori. I do want to note there is an important difference between reincarnating and incarnating. Incarnating is what Sukuna, Uro, all the calling game players do. That's not what we're going to have them do though. They're going to be reborn as a new person. However, we're going to keep them with their curse technique as well as very similar traits to who they are originally as a person, just having them reborn in the modern era. Now, they're not going to have many memories of who they once were. Those memories might end up coming and just being suppressed or might not ever come. I'm not sure about that right now, but it might end up happening in the future, who knows? However, just for the sake of the story, we're going to have Kashimo reincarnate as the same age as the first years, mainly because I think that's the best way to have them relevant right off the bat, and I think that might be the most interesting because we never really got to see him interact with any of the first years. So without further ado, let's get straight into this story now. Our story starts 400 years ago, as there was an old man currently present sitting with the bodies of several sorcerers who had come to challenge him, each of them being defeated. This sorcerer was the god of lightning, Hajime Kashimo. However, as another person was coming to arrive in order to grant him an offer, sickness got to him first, as Kashimo fell to the ground dead, not killed by a single sorcerer that was stronger than him, instead falling to his very own illness. And when Kenjaku arrived, he looked down with a neutral expression as he said, "Oh well, guess I was a little too late." While he did want to add Hajime Kashimo to the culling games, it was going to be impossible now. He had died, so there was no way for him to put him into a cursed object. So that would just be one player missing from the culling games, but it wouldn't really affect much. However, while Kashimo's body died, his soul was too strong. His soul had a massive desire to fight someone stronger than him, and yet he still died. He had no chance to be able to become a vengeful cursed spirit either because of the fact that he died to his own self. He died to his own body, which would prevent him from becoming one. But this soul and this desire kept his body alive until he was eventually reborn in the modern era, being reborn around 400 years later in the year 2003. Welcome to the story of what if Kashimo was reborn in the modern era. Hajime Kashimo would have been born into a sorcerer family. For the sake of this what if and just making things easier, we are going to say that Kashimo Hajime still has the same name. Basically, just assume that his parents decided, hey, I like really old names, we're going with that name. He belonged to a family of sorcerers, nothing too special, both of them were around the levels of a grade 2. However, as the boy was growing up, they were able to notice something quite fast. The boy had an immense amount of talent in terms of combat, picking up how to use curse energy with relative ease. And furthermore, it was their curse technique that they seemed to have that was even more impressive, which this curse technique was one that revolved around electrical phenomena. Though it seemed using the peak of this curse technique would have ended up killing Kashimo, which was something that he figured out through training and something that they were going to avoid. During his training, he seemed to be particularly good with his hand-to-hand combat, as well as his bow stuff that he was just as adept with in combat. But more importantly, as he was growing up more and more, they noticed that he had an urge to fight. He had an urge to get stronger and fight the strongest people he could. This was going to push him to become much stronger, down to the point where when he was about to enter into Tokyo High, he had already surpassed both of his parents, being appointed the rank of semi-grade 1. And as he was preparing in order to become a student in the jiu-jitsu world, he heard about a rumor about a boy who had consumed Ryomen Sukuna, the ancient evil from over 1,000 years ago and the peak of sorcery. This boy was also going to be a student in the same year as him, which made him even more intrigued, as he was rather curious how strong this boy was. Furthermore, he was also rather curious about something else, how strong the 10 Shadows wielder was, since he knew the 10 Shadows wielder was also present at this school. Finally, there was one more thing he was curious about. He wanted to battle against the strongest person alive in the modern era, a person that his parents had warned him about to be careful around, this person being Satoru Gojo. In truth, Kashimo had always felt kinda disconnected with his parents. After all, in his own eyes they were weaklings. They weren't as talented as him. He was only the age of 15 and he was already stronger than both of them, so why did their opinions matter much to him? Kashimo would have then taken a train in order to meet up with the other first years that would be attending Jiu-Jitsu High this year, where he ended up meeting Nobara, Yuji, Megami, as well as Gojo Satoru. His first focus was on Yuji right off the bat, though he quickly lost interest in Yuji. After all, Yuji seemed to be a completely normal person who had just recently awakened curse energy. Though he did have to admit he could already tell that in terms of physicality he was superhuman. Without curse energy reinforcement, he would definitely lose to him in a fight. Which did make a slight bit of interest rise in Kashimo's head about how well he would do if the two of them were to spar once he did gain curse energy reinforcement. Though at the same time he did also remember that he had only just recently awakened curse energy, which did put the thought into his mind of what will this man be like after a year of training, or maybe even 2 years, which made him even more intrigued and excited to fight him. When he looked over to Nobara, all he could see really was someone who was pretty average. He didn't seem too impressed by them. Megumi seemed a bit odd to him. He really couldn't put a tell on his strength level right now, but something about him felt odd, like he should be stronger but he couldn't quite tell why. And finally there was the man himself, Satoru Gojo, who he was the most intrigued and curious about fighting. After all, he could tell Satoru Gojo was strong, he could feel his presence right now, and he wanted to test it himself. But he also knew just off of one look that he wouldn't stand a chance, that his parents were actually right and this guy was the real deal. However, he did ask Satoru Gojo a question, which was a question that caught everybody off guard, as the question he asked Satoru Gojo was, were you born as the strongest or did you become the strongest? Gojo thought about that one for a moment as he was thinking on how to answer that one best, before he shrugged and decided to say both. However, this left Kashimo wanting to get even more answers, but before he could get the opportunity to have more answers, they were all informed they were going to have a mission in order to test the two of them, those two being Yuji and Nobara. He also explained that Kashimo had already proven himself, but Nobara he was still a bit more curious about. Now, Nobara was taking this as a test of her power. In reality, this was Gojo testing her insanity, and if she was truly insane enough to be a Jujutsu sorcerer. This leads into her Pognai mission going mostly the same, with Kashimo slightly changing his opinion a bit more, and now starting to think that Nobara might have a little bit more potential than he gave him credit for. She might be slightly above average. Though he was able to figure out pretty fast among the first year body that he was certainly the strongest out of the 4 of them, which would lead to the group of 4 being sent to the detention center for their first real and proper mission. And when Ichiji tells them to not engage with the special grade curse, while the other 3 are cautious about it, Kashimo gained a glint of excitement in his eyes. He was finally going to get a proper challenge. Before they were then approached by a woman who was the mother of one of the prisoners, as she had come to try and give her son a visit, which ended up making a look of determination spawn in Yuji as he told the 3 other students that they needed to save them. While Megumi was silent and Nobara also had that same look of determination, Kashimo had a confident smirk, as Kashimo made a comment that he found his heroism to be quite entertaining. However, in truth, Kashimo was down to save them, mainly because that would more than likely get them really close to the special grade cursed spirit that he really wanted to fight. This would lead into Nobara being captured by one of the spirits, as well as Megumi and Yuji both having an argument about the prisoners, with Kashimo choosing not to butt in on that argument, mainly seeing it as pointless. However, the 3 were suddenly caught off guard as they saw the white dog was dead, as well as the finger bearer arrive. Before a confident smirk rose on Kashimo as he told Yuji and Megumi that the 2 of them could run and he was going to handle the battle against this creature. And while Megumi did run, Yuji decided that he was going to stay behind and help out Kashimo, with Kashimo saying, "Good, try and keep up." As Kashimo in a burst of speed immediately rushed towards the finger bearer with Yuji moving behind him, as Kashimo went for a kick right on the finger bearer's head while Yuji went for a punch on its chest. And while the finger bearer was able to block both of those blows, suddenly the finger bearer felt a torrent of electricity go through its body. This torrent of electricity was Kashimo's passive curse energy trait, something that Yuji was being able to see for the first time. And this second of paralysis was something that both Yuji and Kashimo took advantage of, as they both landed a punch on the finger bearer's face, sending it flying backwards. And Yuji did definitely notice something weird was going on about Kashimo and his entire curse energy, which made him even more intrigued, and he wanted to know if his curse energy could function like Kashimo's did. But despite the finger bearer knocked back, it took no damage from either of their strikes. Which, while that did terrify Yuji, it made a wide grin of excitement rise on Kashimo, as it meant for once he was actually going to be forced to use that other ability of his, as he told Yuji that there was no need to be afraid and that he's got this. As he told Yuji to watch and learn, beginning his next assault, as he rushed towards the finger bearer, ducking underneath its first punch and then uppercutting it in the chin, releasing another charge onto the finger bearer's body and staggering it for a little bit longer, as Kashimo began to rapidly land blows on its body, landing punch after punch on its chest as well as one punch on its gut, before he jumped back as sparks began to rise around Kashimo's fingertips. In terms of raw reinforcement, Kashimo was a semi-grade 1. However, when he utilized his lightning bolt, he entered into the grade 1 territory of power. As the finger bearer suddenly felt a wave of pressure as well as fear rise through its body, it knew that it had to be careful with what was about to hit it. Yuji could also feel the power that was emanating off of those lightning bolts in Kashimo's hand. Before Kashimo released the lightning bolt, something that the finger bearer had no chance to dodge as it went right through the finger bearer's stomach. As the finger bearer fell to the ground, a massive hole piercing right through its gut, with Kashimo looking back to Yuji with a confident grin, as he told him that's how it's done. However, unfortunately, Kashimo had let down his guard way too fast, as suddenly the finger bearer had focused a large amount of curse energy around its fist, while the wound in its stomach healed. As Kashimo turned around, sensing that curse energy increase, but it was too late as it landed a punch on Kashimo's face. Before the finger bearer then focused and released a large wave of curse energy, hitting both Yuji as well as Kashimo and knocking Kashimo out. Not just that, but Yuji had also taken some heavy damage from that. While Kashimo was able to shield his own body with curse energy, Yuji was not, and this resulted in his hands being broken. And Yuji hated this. He hated feeling absolutely weak right now, but he needed to find a way to beat the Finger Bearer. He needed to find a way to defeat it because he couldn't just die in vain, and more importantly, he couldn't let one of his new friends die in vain, which led to Yuji making a decision. In the heat of the moment, he gave control over to Sukuna. However, there was one condition to it, which that condition was to make sure that Sukuna wouldn't hurt Kashimo. And now I know some of you guys might be thinking, okay, why is he gonna make it specifically just about Kashimo and not about Megumi and Nobara as well? But that's mainly because he thinks that Megumi and Nobara would have escaped by now, and Kashimo's really the only person around that can get hurt, similar to why he never really made one in canon either. As Sukuna took control back over of the body before eliminating the Finger Bearer and that entire fight going like canon, as well as Sukuna leaving Kashimo, mainly because, well, he couldn't really fight him right now thanks to the deal that he had made with Yuji, and he didn't want to accidentally risk waking Yuji up. Even with the fact that Yuji wasn't waking up normally, he didn't want to push that bear, nor did he really want to test around with binding vows. Hi, this is Future Eternal Flame speaking. I kind of forgot to mention what the Binding Vow actually was, which that Binding Vow was specifically to grant Sukuna control to kill the Finger Bearer, and that's it. It only allowed him to kill the Finger Bearer. Other than that, he just has complete control over his body, and Yuji can't take back control. This leads into the battle between Sukuna and Megumi going the exact same as well. This leads to all three of them thinking that Yuji is dead, and Kashimo in particular takes this rather hard, as he was questioning why Yuji would throw his life away for him, despite the fact that they barely knew each other. If anything, Kashimo treated him kinda badly. Though at the same time, it was a move of either both Kashimo and Yuji would die, or Yuji would take out the Finger Bearer with him and end up dying in the process. So on a logical front, this did also end up making sense since it was only one life taken, being Yuji's life. And while this did confuse him, it did also end up spawning a new flame in him. He didn't want someone to sacrifice their life to protect him. He hated how this made him feel. It made him feel like he was weak and insignificant, even though he was born incredibly powerful. So Kashimo for once felt the urge and need to train. He wanted to get stronger to make sure this was never going to happen again. He was born powerful and he could feel that he had only accessed a portion of his power, but now he had an actual reason to train. The Todo, Megumi, Mai, and Nobara interaction does end up going the exact same as well, mainly because Kashimo doesn't really hang out with the other years that much either. He's kind of just super focused on training, and while he doesn't have much problem with socializing, he doesn't really like socializing with the two of them, though Nobara does get the two of them to hang out sometimes as well. Thanks to a mix of Nobara's action and him just having a really good personality to bounce off of both Nobara as well as Megumi, they do end up becoming friends, especially friends in training, which ends up with them training with each other a lot more often too. The Mahito arc also ends up going the exact same, however now we move into the Goodwill Festival. And when Kashimo saw Yuji again, he couldn't help but want to spar with him. If he was being honest, he was kind of tempted to just completely ignore the Goodwill Festival as a whole and instead spar with Yuji, but at the same time he knew they had to focus on the Goodwill Festival first. They could do a sparring match later. But he could tell while Yuji did improve his curse energy, it was still rather amateur in the way it looked right now, but he did definitely get stronger nonetheless. However, now we enter into a slight conundrum, which is the fact that for the Goodwill Festival to happen, it needs to be an equal 7v7. However, Tokyo High has a total of 8 students in comparison to Kyoto, which has a total of 7 students. So because I do think this would be a really cool fight to happen, I'm going to have Kashimo replace Panda. Mainly because I really like the idea of robot versus lightning. I'm going to be real with you guys. So just assume that Panda is sick right now or out on a mission or something. However, because of Kashimo training with Nobara as well as Megumi during this time, all 3 of them did end up getting quite a bit stronger in terms of their reinforcement. However, how the Goodwill Festival is going to go, you're going to have to find out on the next episode of What If Kashimo Was Reborn in the Modern Era. Tell me what you guys think in the comment section down below about What If Kashimo Was Reborn in the Modern Era and what you guys think on this first part of this story.